Hallo und herzlich willkommen im Lesesaal 1 mit der letzten Lesung für heute Abend. Wir werden gleich Brandon Sanderson begrüßen mit seinem neuen Buch Turm der Lichter. Ich halte das mal kurz in die Kamera. Das ist die deutsche Ausgabe. Ist ein bisschen schwierig. So, das ist die deutsche Ausgabe. Die Lesung wird in Englisch stattfinden. Ihr könnt auch gerne Fragen stellen, wie immer. Wer sich nicht sicher ist, wie er die Frage auf Englisch formulieren soll, ihr könnt die auch gerne per Chat auf Deutsch stellen und wir fragen dann auf Englisch weiter. Das ist gar kein Problem. Das Buch Turm der Lichter ist ein Teil der Stormlight-Erzählungen, jetzt verhaspel ich mich kurz, die alle in dem Cosmere, ich hoffe, ich spreche es richtig aus, wenn nicht, darf Brandon mich gleich korrigieren, spielen, wie viele andere seiner Reihen und Romane auch. Aber ich würde sagen, wir rufen ihn einfach mal rein und switchen jetzt zu Englisch. So, welcome, Brandon Sanderson, with your new book.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to. So, would you like first to talk a little bit or start directly with the reading?
I am totally flexible. Why don't we do a few questions first, or a few things to chat about first, and then do the reading? But if you would rather me go the other way, then I am totally flexible.
First, I have the impression that the Cosmere, is it right? Pronounced Cosmere?
That is correct. Yes.
That's correct. Okay. That it's very complex. So I tried to start in the middle of these books and don't get anything. So I think I had to start on another point. Maybe you tell a little bit about the universe and Cosmere, what people.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it is somewhat complex, but I try to ease you into it if you start at the beginning of the books, which I would recommend. The Cosmere is an interconnected universe of fantasy novels. And in the early books, the connections are very subtle. They're not very overt. And as the book series have progressed, these little connections have become more and more relevant. And the two main series, Mistborn and Stormlight, are sharing some significant crossover elements at this point. But the idea is that you should still be able to read only one series if you want to, and get, not be lost or anything like that. I've always wanted to do something like this. When I was a kid, it was something that was really intriguing to me, this idea of different planets, kind of like, you see in Star Wars or Star Trek, except done in a fantasy world, where a fantasy universe instead, where you have these different cultures and different planets interacting. And that's what I've been building the Cosmere to be.
Okay, that's the first question in our chat room. Irrefute asks, what will be your next books, and will there ever be a continuation to the Arithmetist?
That is a question I get a lot. So on the first question, my next two books in English will be the third book in the Skyward series, which is my young adult science fiction series, and then the final book in the Wax and Wane Mistborn series, which will be next year. I don't know when in translation exactly these things will be out. For instance, in Germany, it's usually there's a delay behind getting them done in English, and then it takes a lot of work to translate one of these books, as you held up how big they are. So yeah, it takes a lot of work to do that. So I can't guarantee when they will be out there. There will someday be a continuation of the Arithmetist. I can't promise when. It was, this is a young adult series I was working on in 2007, when The Wheel of Time, which is a major fantasy series, was handed to me to finish. And I kind of had to drop everything else and work on that. And it's been really hard to pick up those things from that earlier part of my career and finish them in a good way. And so slowly I've been finishing them. I finished Legion, I finished Alcatraz, which are the other two things I was working on back then. So there's only one remaining, but I can't guarantee when it will happen.
Okay. So maybe we start with the reading now and talk again later. So I mute myself. So the stage is yours.
Great. So I am always looking for something to read when it's time for a reading that people haven't seen before. I like to read, I like to give you an exclusive look. And this gets hard sometimes because I also don't want the readings to be spoilers for future books. If you're watching this and you're not familiar with my work, I don't want you to get a reading from a later book in the Stormlight Archive, for instance, and have major plot elements spoiled. And right now, there's not a reading from the next two books that I could think of that I'm working on, the ones I just mentioned, that I didn't think would spoil a lot. And so instead, I actually dug up a short story I wrote a few years back. I haven't done anything with this short story. I don't know where it's going to be. It might end up in a collection of short stories if I ever do one. I've just got a slowly growing bunch of those. And I thought, hey, this would make a fun. The reading, we're only doing about a 10-minute reading. And I thought, I'll read to you a little bit from this short story. So it's very unlike a lot of the things I do. Most of what I write is epic fantasy, and this is not. So if you're brand new to me and you want to go get a taste of what I write, I would recommend going to read either Mistborn or reading The Emperor's Soul. Those are the places I would send you. Or perhaps the first Skyward book. But here is a story that I've called Brain Dump. And we're not going to get through all of it, but we'll start at the beginning. Whose brain do you have? The stylish saleswoman asked. Baraka fumbled for an answer. She'd never been asked it like that, so outright. People usually danced around the topic. We have natural brains, Rod answered, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Both of us. The saleswoman pursed her lips, outlined in black, painted cherry in the centers. Oh, we don't get many of your persuasion in here. She glanced across the showroom where salespeople in silver business attire led couples past stainless metal counters, each ornamented by a single holo display of a brain. The 20 or so holograms each hovered and rotated in the light, like lines of music box ballerinas. It wasn't for religious reasons, Rod explained. Really, we're just a couple of flukes. Lab mix-up on my part. I was an accident, Baraka said. Conceived the old-fashioned way. My mother didn't realize she was pregnant until it was too late. And you found each other, the saleswoman said with a radiant smile. That's sweet. Well, it was Rod and Baraka, right? My name is Z, and I'm here to help. Please don't hesitate to let me know if you have any questions. We want this to be a comfortable, informative shopping experience. Rod, I love the shirt. Where did you get it? Rod glanced down at his shirt, then grinned. At the series 10 years back, when the Rangers won. I was there, top row, but I was there. They could have gotten seats a few rows lower, Baraka said, taking his arm, but he thought it would be a better story if you were in the literal last row. I agree, Z said. It is a better story. You sound like a deliberate kind of person, Rod. No wonder you've come to us. It was a nice segue. Z had a charming, no-pressure attitude as he strolled them into the showroom, moving with the same gentle flow of the other salespeople. She's got a brain designed to maximize interpersonal skills, Baraka thought to herself. Maybe the Benchley? She didn't ask, of course. She didn't feel comfortable prying. Z listened to Rod's story, he did love telling it, about almost missing the game-winning run because they wanted a hot dog. Of course, that was an excuse to talk about how the stadium got around the ban. But as they reached the first station, Z skillfully took control of the conversation again. Can't believe you ever wanted to eat one of those, or believe you even wanted to eat one of those, Z said. I could never eat a hot dog. Well, I'm not generally known for my decision-making aptitude, Rod said. Nonsense, Z replied. You're here, aren't you? That's good marketing, Baraka thought, reassessing. Maybe she's got a business-focused brain. The who go? We just want to do this right, Rod said, for our kid. We want the perfect brain. Well, I'm afraid I can't help you, Z said. Baraka frowned. You can't? But I mean, this is a brain dump. We at Crescendo prefer to just call it the showroom, Z said with a laugh. But what I mean is that there is no perfect brain. She turned and gestured to the holographic brain hovering above the first counter. The decor was sleek, stylish, simple. Nothing to distract from the holograms. It's a common mistake, Z said. We all have intentional brain architecture these days. Or, well, most everyone does. But intentional doesn't mean perfect, though it can be perfect for you. There's an old myth that says humans only use a small portion of their brain capacity. That's never been true. Every cell and every neuron is important. No designer, no matter how skilled, can create a brain that's good at everything. So for your child, we have to ask ourselves what you value most. What do you want your little one's strengths to be? That makes sense, Rod said, glancing at Baraka. He must have noticed her frown, he usually did, so he nudged her. What are you thinking, Bara? If there aren't any perfect brains, she asked, does that mean that each of these are going to be bad at something? Unfortunately, yes, Z said. Now, our designer brains are the best, top of the line, don't mistake me. Your child is going to have incredible capacity and endless potential. But with enhancements to most capacities will come slight disendowments in others. She gestured to the brain beside them. The Delphi, she said proudly, designed by Kubu Noritami, based off the brains of the most genius painters of our times. A child born with this brain architecture has a 3,000% higher chance of becoming a master artist than children born with a natural brain. It also includes above average computational skills, giving a high likelihood of aptitude in mathematics. It is one of our most very popular architectures. 3,000, Ron said. Wow. He glanced at Baraka, then nudged her again. What? It has a weakness, though, right? Baraka asked. Some mild disendowments in interpersonal skills, Z admitted, though the enhancements to personal discipline and individualism will ensure that the child is quite adept at working on their own. And this is very common, and it is very common for a little eccentricity to accompany an artist anyway. So this is basically a feature. Who doesn't love the idea of the quirky artist, a genius with a different way of seeing the world? Good marketing, Baraka thought. Rod rubbed his chin. I don't much like the idea of a kid I can't talk to. Oh, you'll be able to talk to him, Rod, Z promised. Don't worry about that. But come, we have 17 different architectures for the choosing, each designed by one of the best brain architects alive. She strolled them along, showing off several more. A charismatic model, which Z promised would make the child 6,000% more likely to achieve success in politics. That one came with the weakness of an impatient, sometimes argumentative attitude. Just like you'd expect, Z exclaimed. The next was a science-focused brain, patterned after the mind of Kat Guttrich, the very woman who had pioneered brain architecting. It was Crescendo's biggest claim to fame, giving them an advantage over the other 7 major companies selling architectures. You keep mentioning percentage chances, Rod said, waving at the science-focused brain. So, I mean, are there people with this brain that don't become scientists? Great question, Rod, Z said. There are actually. Nothing is guaranteed. Your child will have their own personality. We don't want everyone to be clones. These architectures set a child up for success, but the individual has to make their own choices. That said, I assure you, any children born with our architectures have a very high rate of excellence. Now, you really need to see the DiMaggio, a brain optimized for sports performance. Did you know that Donnie Tin has one of these? Tin the bin? Rod said. Really? You're kidding me. I have his jersey. It's even digitally signed. Excuse me. It's even digitally signed. Baraka smiled. She'd known this was coming. That's why she'd steered him to this store first. In fact, she'd read about most of what Z was saying. Baraka had probably been a little too zealous in her research, if she were honest. She just hated going into experiences feeling foolish. And if she read a few things first, then she picked it up faster in person. Rod, though, he just liked to go in and ask experts. Reading had never really been his thing. Has a 7,000% greater chance of playing professional sports than a natural brain, Z finished, gesturing to the DiMaggio with a flourish. 7,000? Rod asked. Indeed. So what's the weakness, he asked. Math, Baraka said. I read all about it. She hadn't really grasped, however, that they'd all have weaknesses. It seemed silly in retrospect to have not noticed. Everyone had their hangups. She just assumed that if you went with the best, if you came to crescendo, you wouldn't have to worry about that. That's the case, Rod said. The kid would fit in well in our home, eh? They continued through the showroom, though Baraka's eyes lingered on that hovering brain, rotating slowly, so complex and full of lights. That was what Rod would want to pick, and she was inclined to agree. The sports brain was tempting, but the cost. This is the boardroom, Z said, gesturing to the next hovering brain. An architecture is optimized for interpersonal skills, leadership, and teamwork. The CEO of this very company has a boardroom brain. The architecture is one of the very best for exceptional business acumen. What's the weakness then, Rod said. Bad water cooler jokes? Well, those are an optional extra. No, the boardroom has a slight disendowment of individualism and ambition. Downgraded ambition, Baraka said, for a business-focused brain? It's actually an advantage, Z said. Though we often talk about the ruggedly individualistic entrepreneur, those types burn out quickly, and their great deeds can often be traced to a more level-headed executive underneath them. Ask any manager, and they'll tell you, it's better to have people who work well in groups with modest ambition than ones who want to tear the place up and make themselves famous. Rod smiled. I like how you do that. Oh, Z said, how I do what? You make every one of the weaknesses sound like it's this great thing, Rod said. He pointed to Baraka. Sounds like the sort of things you write. I'm in marketing, Baraka explained. I've been admiring your showmanship. It can be a bit much, can't it? Z said, leaning in. I'll admit most of these lines are ones we're fed, but I guess the brain architectures are like life itself. Yeah, you have to take the best of what you have and then put the spin you can on it. Baraka cocked her head. That felt more candid than the other things Z had been saying, like they were seeing through her mask a little. That's your brain, isn't it? Baraka said, pointing at the hologram. You have a boardroom. And as soon as she said it, Baraka was immediately embarrassed by blurting it out like she had. Where was her tact? Z blushed. Another glimpse past the mask. You're right, she said. I'm surprised you guessed. I have an earlier design, of course. Each of our architectures is updated each year. But you're not a CEO, Rod said with a frown. You're just Oh, Rod, Baraka said, squeezing his hand. He took the sign and cut himself off, but not before Z blushed again. Well, we can't all be CEO, she said. I mean, I've got a very good job. I get to work with people like you, Rod. I suppose that's true, he said. Sorry, I didn't mean anything by it. No, I didn't take anything from it. Come, let me show you the recreator, where we can look at what the recreator, where we can look at what your child might look like. All right, I'm going to stop there. That's 10 minutes. That's it's only about a third of the way through the story, but that's a first draft. So I apologize for some of the roughness in the language now and then. And actually, as it occurs to me, that's the first time I've done a reading in quite a while because of COVID and not touring as much. I'm a little rusty as well, you could probably tell. But it's called Brain Dump. Maybe someday it'll be published. I just thought it would be fun to read you something that was in an early draft.
Yeah, thank you very much. Someone in the chat, where is it? Helion Byrne pointed out that you tell in some of your classes that your short stories might to expand a little bit. So I'm not wondering that we're only in a third of the story.
Yeah, my short stories do tend to be not very short. I've written a couple of actual short stories, but most of what I write strays into the novelette size, which is the category above short story. or into the novella size, which is the category above that. So yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of applause and cheering from the chat. There was another question. Ree asks if your universe expands with every book that you write. How do you keep the overview and make sure it still all makes sense? And
that's an excellent question, because it does expand. So there are a couple of things I have going on here. One is I keep my eye on the end goal, right? Even though each book expands things, I don't want to get sidetracked too much. I let the sidetracking happen in the short stories and novellas. We just did this with Stormlight, where I wrote a novella about a character whose story didn't fit in the main story because it wasn't keeping my eyes on the goal of those main stories. I also have multiple people whose job is to help me keep it all straight. The main ones that do this are Peter Ahlstrom, Karen Ahlstrom, and Isaac Stewart. And they are basically my extra brains who make sure that I'm keeping it all straight and I can keep track of it all. We have a very detailed wiki that we use for keeping track of it all.
Yeah, I guess you have to. And there's another one in the chat pointing out the ending scene of Mistborn, the scene with Sazed in the end, and she said it was the best ending that she ever read, and cried like a baby because it was so great. That's what she wanted to tell you.
Well, thank you very much.
Or he, I don't know.
Yeah, I work a lot on my endings. It's one of the things I love, a really spectacular ending to a story. It's something that, it's one of my favorite parts of reading books. And so I do spend quite a bit of time trying to come up with something that's going to feel thematically powerful.
And Rianne asks that in your books are many sketches and illustrations of details and maps. How are they created? Do you sketch it yourself? Do you have an illustrator, or how does it work?
So the only things I ever did myself were in my first book, Elantris, where I did the symbols myself. From there, I moved on to hiring professional artists. And very early on, I met Isaac. I mentioned him earlier, Isaac Stewart, and he became my chief illustrator and my art director. These days, we have a small team, including Ben McSweeney, and we have a bunch of artists we work with, and Isaac coordinates that. So basically, I'll write the book and make some suggestions on the pieces of art. Isaac will then read the book and come up with some other suggestions. He and I will brainstorm together about what the best pieces of art and will be for this book and where they should go and who should do them. And then Isaac will either illustrate some of them himself. He tends to be really good with maps and tends to be really good with symbols. And so most of the maps and symbols in the books are done by Isaac. And then he hires other people to do different sorts of sketches and things like that. So for instance, Shalon's sketchbook is usually done by Ben McSweeney. But we have a whole host of illustrators. You can see them credited at the beginning of the books. And we have a lot of wonderful people that we work with. And we end up with these cool things. I've always thought as a writer that that books need more art. I like it when you open up a novel and there are even just little sketches. I love, for instance, Lord of the Rings containing, the map in it, and The Hobbit in particular having the map that they even carried with them. I love these artifacts of a fantastical world, and I try to include as many as are reasonable in the books that I'm working on, because I just think that they make the books that much cooler.
Yeah, I like the stuff very, 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 very much in books, always. But you can't find it very often.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that I get to do because of my success, because it is a big extra expense, right?
Yeah.
We spend, and I buy all the art myself. It's not the publisher. And so we spend quite a bit of money on all of these illustrations and things, just because I think it's what makes part of what makes the books distinctive.
Yes. And another question is, how did you start writing, and what did you advise to people who want to start reading? I guess I've read you studied creative writing, but I don't know if you started writing before or within it.
So I started, I am a little odd in this regard, because most writers that I know, they started writing when they were very young. And I did not. You can find this story around. I've told it before, so I won't go into too much depth about it. But I was 14. I had a teacher who was a wonderful teacher, and she got me reading fantasy novels, and I fell in love with the fantasy genre. And I decided I wanted to be a writer. And so by about 16, I started my first book, and it was dreadful. I didn't finish a novel until I was 22. I believe I was 22, somewhere around there. And that's when I was at college, and I had been a chemistry major, and I changed to English because I decided I really want to be a writer. I want to give this a try. And so after 1 year of chemistry, I changed to English, and I just dove headfirst right into it. And over the next almost 10 years, it was more like 8 years, I wrote 13 novels, 12 more beyond the first one that I had finished. And that was the best practice that could happen for me, was spending all that time just working on my craft. And I didn't sell one until I had written 13. And so I was not very good at it when I began. You can probably tell from that number. But you asked where to start if you want to start reading. I don't know if you meant writing or if you meant reading, but if you want to start reading my books, as I mentioned earlier, I would start on Mistborn, Skyward, or The Emperor's Soul. If you want to start writing, I would recommend just sitting down and doing it. The best thing you can do is just start practicing. And having a good mindset is going to be key. Excuse me. I would recommend that you think about writing like you would think about learning to play piano or any other instrument. You're going to practice. Your goal is practice. Your goal is consistent practice. Set aside some time every week and work on your stories, and focus on the idea that this practice is making you a better writer. Don't focus on the story itself as much when you're starting. Focus on trying new things and teaching yourself good habits. And you may be just an absolute prodigy and your first book be brilliant and you'll publish it. Probably not. Most of us aren't. But that's okay. Don't stress about that. Don't stress about even how good the book is. That's not useful for you when you're a new author. What you should be doing is just focusing on, hey, am I enjoying this? What things am I learning? What can I try out in the next scenes of this book? Can I practice jumping between viewpoints? Do I like that better? Do I like a first person? Try a bunch of different things and experiment and build good habits. And do that for a few years is my recommendation. And once you've got a handle on your own writing style and you've built some good habits, then you can sit down and say, all right, what kind of book would I like to write to, if I were going to try and publish it? Where would I want to be in the bookstore? What part of the shelf do I want to be on? What authors am I like? Build yourself a story and start writing, and kind of focus on that one a little bit more as the product. But I wouldn't do this until I'd written several novels first.
Yeah, I think it's like every other art or creative field, like design, painting. You have to practice, or you're a wonder miracle.
Yes, that does happen, right?
Yeah.
Though a lot of those that we hear about, that the first novel gets published, J.K. Rowling is a good example of this. Pat Rothfuss, they spent many, many, many years revising that story after writing it. And they spent their practice time working on the same story, which does work for some people. There are very few people that just write a book, and then the next year publish it for the first time. It does happen. Twilight was one of those, but it's extraordinarily rare and not something I would count on if I were you. I would instead count on what you can control, which is you can control practicing and getting better. You can't control if you're a prodigy or not.
Sadly not. Do you have critics who try to talk you out of writing? If so, how do you overcome them?
So in different stages of my career, I would have different answers to this, right? When I was brand new, I was super anxious about my writing. When I was a teenager, I would hide the pages that I had written after I printed them out so no one would see them and read them, right? And at that stage, I think the way to deal with the critics was to actually just not let them read my books, right? That might have been a good instinct. It's not a good instinct to hide it from everyone. I should have shared it with some of my friends and family, but I should have shared it with, encouraging people, because at that stage of my career, I just needed encouragement to keep going. What helped for me, therefore, was over the years building confidence in my writing slowly by first doing it a lot. The fact that I built these good habits and had written these books, like critics could say, you're not very good at this. But what they couldn't say is, you don't enjoy this, because I did. I knew that I did. And I was very proud of what I created. And I entered this sort of era where it was okay for me to share with people, because I realized I just loved telling the stories. And that became a core sort of way that I deal with this is, on one hand, I do want criticism, right? I think that criticism is a valuable, extremely valuable part of the artistic world. There's way too much art out there for us to experience it all. And we do have to rely on people who say, hey, this is what style of book this is, and this is what I thought of it. This is an extremely valuable service for helping us sort through all of this. Reviews on websites, right? Star reviews. We need these. We need these so that we can see what people have said, and we need the critical ones as well. And so one thing that has helped me in that regard is understanding that art, one of the things we like about art, one of the purposes of art, is to be an individual expression of a human being. And as long as the criticism is not calling the human being worthless, even if it's saying that the piece is bad, that's valuable criticism for the community. And understanding that not everybody's going to like something. There are 1-star reviews of Hamlet where people are like, I just don't get it. I don't know why people like this book. I'm not interested in it. There's 1-star reviews of my favorite author, Terry Pratchett, right? Like, who can give 1 star to Terry Pratchett? But people do, because art is an individual expression, and yes, people are going to have different reactions to things. So I separate all of that from the trolls, because this is the internet. And there are trolls. There are people who will email you and instead of saying, hey, I didn't like your book for these reasons. By the way, don't email the author about that. Generally is good recommendation. Go post that on Goodreads. That resource, if the author is consistently doing something that a lot of the community is saying, hey, you should take a look at this. If you post it consistently, and a lot of people are saying that, the author will find it out. You don't need to email them directly and say, by the way, you suck. But the trolls will be sending emails, and they're looking for blood. They're looking to sense, did they get under your skin? And, there's nothing, no good end can come from letting them get under your skin. You just have to understand that this is how the world works, unfortunately. And then I just kind of go back to this idea that I love writing. I am very proud of my works. So do I care if somebody is writing troll stuff and sending it to me? Not really, right? I write my books because I love writing my books, and it turns out that people do enjoy reading them, for which I am very thankful. But that's kind of the two mindsets I have, and I think you have to treat those two things differently.
Yeah. As a thing, my co-moderator on this reading stage always says in moments like this, it's you can be the most delicious ripest, freshest peach in the world, and there will be someone who says, "No, I don't like peaches."
Yeah. And that's a good thing, right? Because we don't all want to be clones of one another. We want to have a world where a lot of different people have individual tastes.
Yes.
That's really, really important. So it's people are going to not like your work, and you just have to be okay with that and understand that it's actually a good thing.
Yes. There was a question if Elantris will have a second part.
Yes, Elantris will have a second part. My plan is to see if I can do those in the coming years. Those are kind of on the schedule tentatively for me to start in somewhere around 2024 or so. So I start the next Stormlight book. My goal is to start that on January 1st, 2022, and to have that finished by July 1st of 2023, 18 months later, for a publication in fall of 2023, because the publisher really likes to put those Stormlight books out as fast as possible. So then that'll consume my 2023 mostly. And then I'm going to start on the next era of Mistborn and try to weave some Elantris in there if I can.
And there's another question. If the novels you write, the practice novels, were they already set in the Cosmere?
Cosmere. So no, I developed the Cosmere as I wrote those practice novels. So I had wanted to do something like this. One of the reasons that this interconnected world began is because I like big epics. If you can't tell by the ginormous book, again, I like giant epics. It's my first love in storytelling. But I felt as a new author that I did not want to start with a giant epic, both because I think the skill level required was much higher, but also because the ask of the audience was much higher, right? I felt that as a new author, I wanted to release a standalone novel as my first thing. I wanted to be able to say to people, go read this. It is my standalone work, and it's my introduction to you. And so those early books that I wrote were all standalones. They all had series potential, but they are all intended as standalones. And I'm focusing mostly on books 7 through 13, because so 6 through 13, because the first 5 were very practice novel. They're all over the place. But when I decided this is what I want to do for my career, I wrote Elantris was book number 6, and I did not know about the Cosmere then. But when I wrote book 7, I'm like, man, I really want to be writing an epic. Can I make it a hidden epic where I'm connecting things behind the scenes? And as over the years, as I wrote those books, I started to do this. I started to embed this character named Hoyd. I started to come up with this kind of idea of what became the Shards of Adonalsium. And by the time I was working on book 13, I had a big sort of sense for how I was doing this. And it was mostly just pieces here and there. And then I sold Elantris. And so that's when I sat down and said, you know what? I'm going to do this for real. So I outlined the Mistborn trilogy. And the Mistborn trilogy, I built the Cosmere very intentionally. And then I rewrote Elantris to match that new vision for the Cosmere. And so when Elantris came out, it had that embedded in it, and it had the mythology and lore embedded in it. But I had built most of that from the wreckage of those unpublished novels and turned it into Mistborn.
Okay. Will there be any new classes on your channel?
Yes. So they might be asking if there's going to be more. Right now, you can watch my lectures from last year. My university courses, those are my lecture series. You can just go watch those. There will not be this year's. We decided not to put up. We probably won't put up next year's either. It's too repetitive to have the same lecture series every year. I do change as a lecturer, but not that quickly. So we tend to go every 3 or 4 years for recording the lectures and posting them. And so come a few years from now, we'll do another series of lectures again, but that's a little ways off.
Thank you very much. Another question. You finished writing Wheel of Time. What were the challenges of finishing such an iconic series that someone else started?
Man, they were probably too many challenges to list here. I'll pick a couple of them. Keeping track of all of Robert Jordan's characters. We talk about how complex my world is. His was equally complex, and I had to dive in. And as a fan, I could afford to just not pay attention to some of the minor characters. But as the writer of the series, I couldn't afford that. I had to know who everyone was, and that was really challenging. This is kind of, the early days of fan wikis and things like that. And, Robert Jordan's own notes, plus that, I spent a lot of time on just keeping track of who was who. The biggest challenge other than that, I would say, was matching the character voices. I learned early on I couldn't match Robert Jordan's voice as a writer. It's too individual, too distinctive, and I'm not a ghostwriter. That's not what I've practiced doing. Instead, I felt if I could get the characters to feel right, then I was doing the right thing. And I spent a lot of time making sure that happened. And I did a better job with some than with others. But that was my goal, was make sure the characters feel like themselves. And that was those two challenges were what occupied most of my time during those 5 years that I worked on the Wheel of Time. 6 years. Yeah.
That's a lot. If you would not have become an author, what would you have wanted to be instead? I guess biologist.
It's a good guess. I think more likely than biologist would have been becoming a programmer, because I find programming very similar to writing books in that you're creating architecture, you're using your creativity, you're problem solving. I actually took a coding class in college and realized I couldn't take any more coding classes because it felt too much like writing books. And it was the coding class homework was the only homework that interfered with my ability to write books. I got done coding. I'm like, I feel like I've already done my writing for the day. And that was a bad thing. But it does mean that I kind of understand what it's like to be a code monkey. And I think code monkeys understand what it's like to be a novelist. They're actually very remarkably similar skills, despite them being in like completely different departments in the college.
Yes. Will there be any crossovers between the Cosmere worlds and stories?
There will be lots of crossovers, but the biggest one will probably be the final Mistborn trilogy, which is still years away. So for now, the crossovers are going to be kind of smaller scale. I am amping them up a little bit as I move forward in the Cosmere, particularly, as fans get a grasp on how this all works. But I still want people to be able to read. Like, for instance, I want you to be able to pick up Stormlight, read through Stormlight, and not feel like you have to read all these other things to even understand the story. I want you to feel like if I read these other things, I will maybe get more story about some of these people. I'll understand a few more things, but the core narrative, I want you to be able to understand on its own. That's very important to me. And so I do work to make sure that happens. And whether people have varying opinions on whether you need to read, for instance, Mistborn to understand Stormlight. I say that you don't need to, but if you do, it will enhance your enjoyment, I think, of the series.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you plan and structure everything beforehand, or do your characters also develop on their own, their lives?
I do a mix of the two. I do a lot of work ahead of time, kind of deciding what type of story this is, building a framework, as you would call an outline, but more of a thematic skeleton for the story, along with plot arcs that I want to include and how I'm going to do that. I do a lot of world building ahead of time, but character is king in narrative, and at least the narrative styles that I'm doing, and the characters. I let grow to be who they are as I write, which means that I often am retooling the outline to fit who the characters are becoming. But I am primarily an outline-driven writer. I can tell you a fun story. In my first visit to Germany, I got a question like this. Now, I am used to this sort of question, and around the world, particularly, in America, I will often get asked this question with a panel of authors together. And we'll all talk about if we are what we call more discovery writers who write by the seat of our pants and just kind of discover it as it goes along, or if we build an architecture and then write a story around it. And almost always, I'm the only architect on the panel. If you get 4 authors together, they'll all be like, yes, I follow the whimsy and I just go where the story takes me. And then you get to me and I'm like, I build an outline, I build an architecture, I have these tools. And I'm used to being the only one who does that. But
You're a programmer.
I was on what's that?
You're a programmer.
Yeah. But then I was on a panel in Germany and got asked this question. And there were 3 or 4 of us, 3 of us, I think, maybe 4. And everyone down the line, it's like, no, I build an outline. How can you write a story without an outline? You need architecture. And I realized I'm in Germany. Seems like maybe engineering and architecture is more of a German thing than it is perhaps an American thing. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence, but I thought it was amusing. And we're like, oh, the Germans write like I write. That's pretty cool.
You're German by heart.
Yes.
Okay. I'm very sad because it's really a pleasure to have you here, but our time is off nearly. So I think I have to say goodbye to you.
Well, thank you for having me again. This was delightful.
Yeah, thank you very much. So you can say goodbye to the audience if you have last words.
So thank you guys, as always, for your enthusiasm. If you want to see more of me, head over to my YouTube channel. We got a whole bunch of videos on just the Brandon Sanderson YouTube channel of me doing stuff like this. And I will see you around. In English, next big book launch is Cytonic, the next Skyward book. That's in November. We'll be doing a digital release party for that. So thank you guys very much.